Imagine drifting off to sleep tonight, cozy under blankets, maybe with a fan humming in the corner. Now, replace that fan with the sound of a saber-toothed cat growling right outside your cave. Suddenly, restful night's sleep means one wrong snore could get you eaten. Welcome to the nightly reality of early humans. Bedtime wasn't about sheep counting. It was about sheep not being counted by lions first. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors weren't the hunters we picture in documentaries. They were the hunted. Hyenas, leopards, bears taller than door frames if it had teeth. It thought of humans as chewy midnight snacks. And our prehistoric relatives, they had to figure out how to sleep through it. Picture this. You're exhausted from gathering tubers all day. You lie down on a pile of scratchy grass. Just as you're about to drift off, snap! A twig cracks in the dark. Is it the wind? Or is it something with claws the size of steak knives? And suddenly, you realize prehistoric insomnia wasn't a disorder. It was a survival strategy. So tonight, as you relax, let's wander back into those moonlit nights. We'll explore the predators who stalked our ancestors, the tricks early humans used to survive, and how bedtime looked when sweet dreams was really code for, hopefully, not chewed alive. But don't worry, you're safe here. Your only predators are ads you forgot to skip. Darkness is something we take for granted now. We flip a switch, the room glows with light, and the worst thing hiding in the shadows is probably a pair of socks you forgot to put in the laundry. But for early humans, darkness was not cozy, not ambient, not even remotely romantic. Darkness was the curtain that dropped every night to reveal the world's deadliest show, and the cast was hungry. Nightfall, in the prehistoric world, was like the start of a survival lottery, where the grand prize was getting to wake up in the morning, with all your limbs still attached. You have to imagine what it felt like when the sun sank below the horizon. The warmth disappeared, and with it, the last sense of safety. Without the sun, vision collapsed. Our ancestors' eyes, not built for low light, could only pick out vague shapes. The gentle sway of grass looked suspiciously like the movement of something stalking. A rustle in the brush wasn't background noise. It was a possible predator circling closer. The world at night belonged to those with night vision, and unfortunately, early humans didn't come with built-in night vision goggles. They had the biological equivalent of squinting into the void and hoping it wasn't a hyena licking its lips. The predators, on the other hand, thrived in this black velvet theatre. Lions, leopards, hyenas, saber-toothed cats. They all saw the dark as their playground. Many of these creatures had evolved eyes specialized for hunting under starlight. For them, nighttime wasn't a pause button. It was prime time. Imagine a modern cat creeping silently across your living room at 2 a.m., eyes glowing in the faint light. Now multiply that cat by 300 pounds. Add fangs like knives, and you have the nightly neighbors of our ancestors. For the predators, humans weren't intimidating hunters. We were more like convenient little bags of protein waiting to be unwrapped. What's more, early humans didn't have sturdy brick houses with locked doors. Their bedrooms were exposed landscapes, open savannas, tree-lined rivers, or caves that seemed safe until something bigger and toothier decided it wanted the same real estate. Think about trying to relax under those conditions. You're lying down on a bed of grass or dirt, your head cradled not by a memory foam pillow but maybe a rock that looks smooth enough. The air cools, the insects buzz, and then the soundtrack of predators kicks in. Hyenas whooping in the distance, the low rumble of a lion, the sudden shriek of something unlucky becoming dinner nearby. If ASMR had existed back then, it would have been called predator screams in surround sound. Darkness also messed with the human mind in ways that were almost as dangerous as the predators themselves. We're wired to be anxious in the dark because for most of our history, night was when things tried to eat us. That spike of fear you feel when walking to the bathroom at 3 in the morning, that's an echo of a million ancestors who jumped at every shadow because sometimes the shadow had claws. Modern fears like, is someone behind me in this parking garage? Are the evolutionary grandchildren of, is that rustling in the grass about to bite off my face? Early humans had to make choices every night about how to survive the hours of darkness. Do you climb a tree and hope you don't fall asleep so deeply you tumble out like an unlucky apple? Do you huddle in a cave, knowing a bear might wander in and decide you're the new rug? Do you sit by a fire, aware that while it scares away some predators, it also makes you the world's most obvious glowing target? None of these were great options, but they were the only ones available. It was like trying to choose between sleeping next to a swamp of mosquitoes, a pit of snakes, or a nightclub where everyone is armed and drunk. The terror of night also shaped how humans evolved. Unlike many animals that could nap peacefully under the stars, humans had to adapt to a fractured sleep pattern. Instead of long, deep slumbers, they often drifted in and out of light sleep, always half alert. That annoying habit of waking up at 3 a.m. for no reason? It might be a leftover trait, once useful when you needed to make sure you weren't about to become midnight stew. Some individuals stayed more awake to watch for danger, creating the early version of a night watch. Of course, the unlucky guy, assigned to be lookout, probably didn't appreciate his role. Imagine drawing the short straw and realizing you get to sit in the freezing dark, straining your eyes into shadows that your biology guarantees you won't see through, while predators with laser eyes stalk silently nearby. Not exactly a dream job, and yet there were also funny little ironies woven into these terrifying nights. Take snoring, for instance. In our modern world, snoring is just an annoyance that keeps your partner awake. Back then, snoring was like yelling, "Free food over here," into the night. Entire families probably nudged their loudest sleepers awake, whispering desperately, "Shut up, or we're all lion chow." And you thought your partner complaining about your snores was bad. At least they're not worrying about being mauled. So when darkness fell on prehistoric nights, it wasn't just bedtime. It was the opening bell of survival's most dangerous game. Every shadow, every sound, every cold breeze, brushing the skin, could be the start of something fatal. And yet, somehow, humanity endured. We weren't the strongest, or the fastest, or the most well-armed, but we had just enough wit, cooperation, and stubbornness to keep making it through the long, dark nights until sunrise. The darkness was always dangerous, but it also forged the vigilance and social bonds that would later make humans masters of the world. Now let's turn our attention to one of the most infamous players in this nightly horror show, Smilodon, better known as the saber-toothed cat. If the darkness was the stage, Smilodon was the terrifying headline act. Imagine an alarm clock with fangs longer than your fingers, and instead of beeping, it just pounces on you. Congratulations, you've just invented the saber-tooth alarm clock, guaranteed to wake you up permanently. Smilodon lived in the Americas, not Africa, so not all early humans faced it. But for the unlucky populations who migrated into its range, the saber-tooth was the nightmare that prowled just beyond the campfire. These weren't sleek lions you see today on documentaries, gracefully running across the savannah. Smilodons were built like linebackers on steroids. Short, stocky bodies, thick muscles, and jaws designed to deliver a killing blow with teeth that looked like they belonged on a steak knife display at a medieval convention. They didn't run fast for long distances. No, they preferred ambush, which meant nighttime, when everything was slow, tired, and blind, was their ideal hunting hour. Picture lying down for the night in a shallow cave. The family is bundled together for warmth. The last glow of the fire is fading, and the stars above look peaceful. But somewhere in the darkness, padding silently on massive paws, a Smilodon is approaching. Its nose twitches, its ears flick at every sound, and it's listening for exactly what it loves most. Something tired, distracted, and edible. That means you. Scientists believe saber-tooths didn't just rely on brute force. They were patient hunters. Those long teeth weren't great for messy combat. They were delicate tools, more like daggers than crowbars. Smilodon couldn't just go thrashing around because those teeth could break. Instead, it stalked with precision, waiting until it could strike at vulnerable spots, like the throat or belly. Essentially, the Smilodon was less run after you like a cheetah, and more, I'm going to sneak up and assassinate you, like the world's fluffiest ninja. And let's be honest, humans back then didn't stand much of a chance. Sure, they had stone tools, but imagine waving a sharp rock at something twice your size, with jaws designed to crush bones. You'd feel like someone bringing a butter knife to a tank battle. Most of the time, the best defense was avoiding detection altogether. Sleeping near fire, climbing trees, or simply huddling in groups might have reduced the odds of being picked off, but the threat never really disappeared. Smilodon was persistence in fur. Interestingly, scientists studying bones of saber-tooths have found evidence of healed injuries, meaning these cats sometimes survived broken legs or damaged jaws. That implies they may have lived in groups that cared for injured members, much like modern lions. Which means our ancestors weren't just dealing with a single rogue predator. They might have had entire saber-tooth families prowling around their camps. Imagine rolling over in your sleep and hearing not one, but 3 sets of low growls outside. That's not insomnia. That's divine punishment. Night after night, saber-tooths played their role as the prehistoric alarm system. They didn't need to roar to make their presence known. The sound of panicked screams and stampeding humans probably did the job. And yet, even here, humor creeps in. Imagine being the prehistoric equivalent of that one friend who sleeps through anything. The group is running for their lives. Fire scattering, people yelling, and there's always one guy still snoring loudly as the saber-tooth pads right up. Prehistoric Darwin Awards were probably handed out regularly. What's remarkable, though, is that humans survived long enough in Smilodon territory to eventually outlast the cat. While the saber-tooth specialized in being a perfect nighttime assassin, humans specialized in being stubborn generalists. We weren't stronger, we weren't faster, but we adapted. Over generations, our ancestors developed better tools, learned to coordinate hunts, and figured out ways to turn predators into prey. But in those early nights, when the fire was low and the dark was deep, the Smilodon was the prowling nightmare that made everyone huddle closer and whisper prayers to gods that didn't yet have names. So yes, the saber-tooth was the ultimate alarm clock. It didn't wake you up gently. It didn't have a snooze button. Its only setting was instant terror, and its only sound was the scream you made as you realized what was crouching above you. And while we can laugh now, tucked safely in our beds, the memory of predators like Smilodon lives on in our bones. Every time you shiver at a sound in the dark, every time your heart jumps at a rustle outside your window, that's the echo of ancestors who knew that sometimes, when the night fell silent, it meant the saber-tooth was already too close. If lions were the kings of the savannah, hyenas were the unruly mob bosses, the street gangs with no respect for royal titles. And while modern documentaries often make them look like background characters, cackling sidekicks to lions, our ancestors knew the truth. Hyenas were relentless, merciless, and often far more dangerous than the so-called kings. If lions were rare dramatic encounters, hyenas were the daily grind. And the way they treated humans? Let's just say we weren't seen as noble adversaries. We were snacks. Snacks with legs. Picture this. You've had a long day of gathering roots and tubers. Maybe a lucky piece of meat, scavenged from an antelope someone else killed. You finally built a fire, tucked yourself into a rough bedding of grass, and you're hoping tonight you can sleep without your stomach growling too loudly. Just as your eyes start to droop, you hear it, that eerie, high-pitched whoop, echoing across the plain. A laugh, but not the kind of laugh that makes you feel warm inside. The kind of laugh that says, "We found you, and you look delicious." The hyenas are coming. The thing about hyenas is that they hunt in numbers. One hyena, sure, maybe you can scare it off with shouting and waving a stick. But hyenas don't usually travel solo. They arrive in gangs, clans that could number dozens. Imagine lying in the dark, hearing not one laugh, but 20, 30, 40 overlapping voices circling in the night. It wasn't comedy. It was surround sound intimidation. And unlike lions, who might chase you dramatically and then nap for hours afterward, hyenas had no chill. They were the workaholics of the predator world. They'd test every defense you had. Fire? They'd circle just outside the glow, eyes gleaming, waiting for embers to die down. Caves? They'd prowl at the entrance, pacing, sniffing, daring you to make a mistake. Climbing into trees? Well, hyenas couldn't climb like leopards, but they could certainly wait. And they had patience, the kind of patience that makes insomniacs out of even the bravest. Archaeologists have found bone piles in prehistoric caves with unmistakable hyena bite marks. Thick bones, femurs, cracked open for marrow. Hyenas didn't waste food. They ate everything. Skin, hair, bones. If it was organic, it was on the menu, which makes it easy to see why early humans lived in constant dread. To a hyena, humans weren't noble prey. They were just bony snacks, wrapped in chewy skin. But hyenas weren't only scavengers. They hunted with intelligence and teamwork. Picture a group of early humans trying to defend themselves at night, huddled around a small fire. From the shadows, the hyenas test them, pushing closer, darting in and out. They bite at the edges, go for the weakest, the smallest, the unlucky straggler. A misstep, a moment of distraction, and suddenly, someone is dragged, screaming, into the dark. And the sound that follows the chorus of hyena laughter burned itself into the human psyche. It wasn't just hunger they were hearing, it was mockery. That cackle we still hear today in documentaries. It isn't actually laughter. It's communication. Hyenas use it to organize hunts, to signal dominance, to say, "We've got this one cornered." But to early humans, it must have felt like being taunted by the darkness itself. Imagine trying to fall asleep while your predators are literally laughing at you. Forget sheep counting. You'd spend the night counting how many laughs you heard and hoping none of them got closer. The relationship between humans and hyenas wasn't one-sided, though. Over time, our ancestors turned scavenging into competition. When hyenas left scraps, humans picked them clean. When humans dropped their guard, hyenas stole what they could. This back and forth went on for millennia, and it bred not just fear, but grudging respect. Hyenas taught humans hard lessons about vigilance. Always secure your kill, always guard your fire, and never underestimate a creature that can crush bones with jaws strong enough to snap an elephant femur. And yet, for all their terror, hyenas also had an odd place in the comedy of prehistory. Imagine the chaos of a group of humans trying to defend dinner, shouting, throwing rocks, waving torches, while hyenas darted and laughed, yanking away scraps and scattering into the dark. It must have looked like a prehistoric slapstick routine, except the consequences weren't a custard pie. To the face, they were life and death. Even today, traces of that rivalry linger in our bones. Why do so many people find hyena laughter unsettling, even when we know it's just sound? Because once upon a time, that sound meant danger. It meant your fire wasn't enough, your weapons weren't enough, and the night belonged to them. And still, somehow, we endured. The clans of hyenas kept pressing, but humans found ways to push back. Sharper weapons, bigger fires, stronger cooperation. Each night survived was another step toward turning fear into strategy. And though the hyenas laughed, in the end, the last laugh wasn't theirs. It was ours, sitting here today, remembering them as predators we outlasted. But if you listen closely in the dark, you might still feel a shiver when you imagine that mocking laugh echoing across a prehistoric plain. Because for thousands of years, it wasn't a sound effect. It was the soundtrack of survival. Now, if hyenas were the noisy comedians of the night, leopards were the silent assassins. They didn't laugh. They didn't roar. They didn't even announce their presence with glowing eyes around the fire. Leopards preferred a quieter strategy. They went vertical. While humans were staring nervously into the shadows on the ground, leopards were already above, lying on a branch, tail twitching, waiting for the perfect moment to drop in. This made them uniquely terrifying. Other predators you could hear, even if it was just a growl or the crunch of leaves. Leopards, though, were built for stealth. Muscles coiled like springs, paws padded for silence, spots that blended into the dappled moonlight. If hyenas were the noisy upstairs neighbors keeping you awake, leopards were the burglars who climbed in through the window without a sound. Evidence of their habits is carved into the fossil record. Scientists studying ancient hominid bones have found puncture marks in skulls, holes made by sharp, feline teeth driven in from above. That's right, leopards weren't just opportunists, they specialized in the ambush. They would stalk, leap, clamp down on the skull, and drag their prey up into a tree. Early humans weren't exempt from this treatment. To leopards, we weren't budding toolmakers on our way to building civilizations. We were just another meal that could be conveniently stored on a branch for later. Imagine settling in for the night. Your group clustered in a clearing, the fire burning low. Everyone's eyes are on the bushes, straining against the dark. And above you, just a few meters overhead, a leopard is already sprawled across a branch, watching. It waits for the fire to dim, waits for exhaustion to dull your reactions, waits until someone stumbles, half asleep, away from the circle. Then silence broken only by a sudden scream as one of your companions vanishes upward. It was the kind of event that turned sleep into a dangerous gamble. Leopards weren't large like lions, but what they lacked in size, they made up for in strategy. They had the strength to haul prey several times their weight into the canopy. That meant, even if you realized what was happening, the victim was gone before you could intervene. A leopard's dinner plan was efficiency incarnate. Kill quickly, eat later, no competition. Humans were left staring at the empty space where their friend had been. Firelight flickering on the leaves above, listening to the sound of crunching coming from the branches. And if that doesn't make you shiver, think about this. Some anthropologists suggest that fear of what lurks above shaped human sleeping habits just as much as fear of what prowled below. We learned to huddle together, backs against stone walls, to minimize the angles of attack. We learned to use fire not just as a circle of protection, but as an upward glow, casting light into the branches. But still, the leopard was often one step ahead, adjusting, waiting. Despite the horror, there's a darkly comic image here too. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night to use the prehistoric bathroom. You wander into the trees, grumbling when you hear a low hiss. You look up, and there it is, a leopard, staring down at you like a furry, judgmental landlord. You tiptoe backward, whispering, "Nope, nope, nope," and everyone else is snoring blissfully unaware. Nature's version of the world's worst prank. Leopards also left a psychological scar. Unlike lions or hyenas, who usually gave some warning, leopards instilled a paranoia of silence. If it was quiet, too quiet, that was when you were in trouble. Modern humans still carry echoes of this instinct. We're uneasy in silent forests, unsettled when walking alone at night and hearing nothing at all. It's not just imagination. It's the ghost of knowing that predators, like leopards, struck when the world went still. Yet, as dangerous as they were, leopards also pushed humans to innovate. We learned to secure camps more carefully, to keep fires going longer, to climb trees ourselves, not just for safety, but to spot threats before they spotted us. Some researchers even suggest our ancestors began to think like predators, in part because they were hunted by predators, learning patience, stealth, and awareness from the very animals trying to kill them. Leopards were silent teachers in the harshest way possible. So when you picture those early nights, don't just imagine the glowing eyes at ground level. Imagine the branches overhead, bending under hidden weight. Imagine the silence that wasn't really silence. Leopards in the trees weren't just predators. They were a reminder that danger came from every direction, below, above, and sometimes from places you didn't think to look. And that, perhaps more than anything, made prehistoric nights the most restless of all. If there's one thing that can make even a lion seem like a manageable problem, it's a bear the size of a moving van. Meet the short-faced bear, a prehistoric behemoth that makes modern grizzlies look like cuddly plush toys you win at a carnival. When our ancestors in the Americas first encountered these colossal neighbors, they weren't just meeting another predator. They were meeting something that looked like it had been designed by a committee of nightmares who wanted to make sure humans never slept soundly again. The short-faced bear, Arctodus simus, stood over 11 feet tall when it reared up on its hind legs. 11 feet. That's taller than most basketball hoops. Imagine you're an early human, barely scraping 5 feet in height, trying to keep warm in your modest little shelter, and suddenly the moonlight reveals a bear peeking in, its head brushing against the top of your cave. You'd feel like a toddler in a horror movie. And unlike many predators that might hesitate around fire or noise, the short-faced bear didn't exactly see humans as a serious threat. It saw us as obstacles. Small ones, crunchy ones. Their build was unique. Modern grizzlies are massive, but the short-faced bear was longer-legged and lankier, built more like a predator than a lumbering omnivore. They could run covering ground faster than a horse. Scientists believe these bears were built to chase down prey over long distances, meaning you couldn't just jog away into the brush and hope it lost interest. If a short-faced bear wanted you, congratulations, you were the slowest gazelle at the buffet. And the reach. Oh, the reach. Imagine a paw, swinging with claws the size of steak knives. They didn't even need to catch you fully. A lazy swipe could ruin your whole week. And if you somehow scrambled up a tree, bad news. Short-faced bears could stretch high enough to pluck you off like an apple. Prehistoric humans probably learned quickly that trees weren't much comfort when this towering monster was in the neighborhood. But as terrifying as they were, short-faced bears weren't constantly hunting humans. They were opportunists, just like many other predators. Still, opportunity was often bad news for our ancestors. Bears loved carrion. And what were humans doing in those days? Scavenging, dragging meat back to camp, leaving behind the smells of blood and smoke. To a short-faced bear, humans were essentially dinner delivery drivers who forgot how to lock the car. It could simply lumber in, growl, and the meat was handed over. If the humans didn't cooperate, well, they were on the menu too. Imagine the comedy of this situation if it weren't so grim. A small band of early humans painstakingly spends hours scavenging, cutting, carrying chunks of animal back to camp. They sit around proudly, fire flickering, ready to enjoy a hard-earned meal. Then, like the worst neighbor ever, the bear shows up uninvited, shoves its head into the party, and everyone scatters. One by one, terrified, tripping over each other, while the bear helps itself to the roast. If humans had language sophisticated enough back then, you can bet the phrase, "not again," would have been muttered every single time. The short-faced bear's dominance reshaped how humans behaved in the Americas. You couldn't just light a fire and assume you were safe. You couldn't even build shelters and feel secure. The looming possibility of these towering beasts taught early people to be hyper-aware of food storage, of campsite location, of noise. Bears forced humans to adapt, not just tools, but strategies. Maybe that's part of why humans eventually developed better hunting weapons, to avoid being the middleman between a carcass and an impatient bear. And the psychological toll? Immense. It's one thing to hear hyenas laughing in the distance. It's another to hear the thunder of paws and feel the ground tremble as a bear taller than two men barrels toward your camp. Imagine trying to close your eyes with that memory echoing in your head. Humans learned to live with nightly anxiety not just from small, stealthy predators, but from apex nightmares that seemed carved out of myth. Yet, in a strange way, short-faced bears may have accelerated human resilience. Knowing you lived next door to something so unstoppable probably forced our ancestors to cooperate more tightly. One person alone couldn't drive away a bear. 10 people together with fire, noise, and weapons might be able to discourage one. So the presence of these titanic neighbors wasn't just terror, it was pressure that hardened the bonds of community. Fear forged alliances, and alliances kept humanity alive long enough to eventually see the bears fade into extinction. Still, I can't help but think about the absurdity. Imagine being a prehistoric child, asking your parents for a bedtime story, and the moral of every tale is, stay quiet, or the 11-foot tall bear will eat you. Sleep tight, kid. No wonder we still wake from nightmares of being chased. Those dreams are echoes of nights, when the shadows held something real, something immense, something you prayed would walk past your camp instead of straight through it. Now let's move to a very different kind of character in our prehistoric drama. Not an animal at all, but an invention, or maybe, more accurately, a discovery: fire. If the night was a stage for predators, then fire was humanity's spotlight, our one piece of magic that flipped the script. For millions of years, humans had been prey, cowering in the dark, hoping to last until dawn. But when we learned to control fire, suddenly we had a shield, a weapon, and yes, a nightlight. The first humans who learned to keep fire alive probably didn't invent it from scratch. They found it lightning strikes, setting grass ablaze, volcanic eruptions, spilling rivers of flame. Somewhere in those terrifying displays, someone realized, if you take a burning branch, you can carry the light and the heat with you. That moment, simple as it sounds, was revolutionary. Because with fire, humans weren't just meat, hiding in the dark anymore. We were meat, with a security system. Picture a prehistoric camp before fire. The sun sets, shadows stretch, and immediately, predators creep closer. The hyenas laugh, the leopards stalk, the giant bear sniffs at the edge of camp. Everyone huddles together, wide-eyed, clutching crude weapons. Now, imagine that same camp with fire. Flames roar, sparks fly, shadows dance in unpredictable shapes. Suddenly, predators hesitate. That strange flickering, that heat, that smoke, it doesn't behave like anything in nature. Predators used to dominating the night now kept their distance. Fire was our invisible fence, a circle of safety drawn in flames. But fire wasn't just about scaring things off. It was warmth, in a world where nights could kill with cold as easily as with teeth. It was cooking, transforming tough roots into edible mush, turning meat into safer, more nourishing meals. And cooking was a game changer. It gave our ancestors more energy from the same food, and more energy meant bigger brains. In a sense, the flicker of flames around ancient camps didn't just protect humans. It fueled the very organ that would eventually allow us to outthink every predator around. Of course, fire came with its challenges. Keeping it alive was a full-time job. Early humans couldn't just strike a match. They had to nurse coals, feed flames, carry embers from place to place. Imagine the stress of being assigned fire duty. Everyone else is sleeping, and you're sitting there poking at glowing sticks, terrified that if it goes out, your whole family will wake up to find a leopard chewing on their ankles. The first person who invented the excuse, "I swear, I only closed my eyes for a second," probably did so with hyenas circling nearby. And then there's the smoke. Fire was wonderful at keeping predators away, but smoke had a habit of stinging eyes, choking lungs, and clinging to hair and clothing. Imagine smelling like a burnt log every single day of your life. On the plus side, maybe it disguised the smell of human sweat from predators. On the downside, nobody was writing prehistoric perfume ads with slogans like, "Now available, odor campfire." But despite the irritations, fire changed the rhythm of life itself. Before fire, humans went to bed at sunset because darkness was too dangerous. With fire, the night stretched. People could sit around talking, sharing stories, passing knowledge, maybe even laughing. That extra time became the first classrooms, the first theaters, the first warm gatherings where culture was born. In a very real way, fire didn't just keep us alive, it gave us the time to become human. Predators, of course, didn't give up easily. Some would test the boundaries, prowling just outside the glow. Brave or foolish individuals might creep closer, their eyes glinting in the flicker, testing whether this new phenomenon was truly dangerous. And occasionally, a gust of wind or a neglected ember meant the fire faltered and predators rushed in. But overall, fire shifted the balance. For the first time, humans could look into the darkness and feel not powerless, but prepared. And there's something deeply comforting in that image. A group of our ancestors, huddled close, fire crackling, shadows leaping on cave walls, while outside, the predators circled. The laughter of hyenas fades, the quiet paws of leopards retreat, the towering bears hesitate. The fire has drawn its line, and for tonight, humanity sleeps a little safer. Even today, that comfort remains. A candle, a campfire, the warm glow of a fireplace. They soothe us, calm us, make us feel secure. That's not just coziness. That's the echo of countless nights where fire was the only reason our ancestors lived to see the sunrise. Fire was our guardian angel, our weapon, our chef, and our storyteller, all in one. And though predators may have dominated the night for millions of years, once we learned to control fire, the balance began to shift. The prey was starting to fight back. For all the magic fire gave our ancestors the warmth, the cooked meals, the glowing shield that kept nightmares with teeth at bay, it also came with a catch. Like every hero in history, fire had its flaws. And one of those flaws was smoke. The kind that creeps into your nose, burns your eyes, and makes you cough so violently that every predator within a mile knows exactly where you are. Imagine finally mastering humanity's first great tool, only to realize you've invented the world's earliest burglar alarm for animals who weren't exactly burglars, but more like uninvited dinner guests with sharp claws. The irony is almost comical. Fire was supposed to protect you from predators, but sometimes the very thing that made you feel safe was also a neon sign blinking across the dark plains. Fresh meat inside, fully cooked. A roaring fire lit up the landscape, announcing your camp like a festival in a desert. The flicker of flames, visible for miles, didn't just attract curious humans. It drew in hyenas, lions, and everything else with a functioning nose. Smoke carried the scent of roasted meat farther than the eye could see. And to predators, that smell wasn't intimidating. It was tantalizing. Our ancestors must have realized this quickly. One can imagine an early human, coughing miserably in the haze of a smoky fire, peeking out to see pairs of eyes glowing at the edge of the camp. The thought probably occurred, we wanted to scare them off, but now we've just invited them to dinner. It was the prehistoric equivalent of accidentally sending your party invite to everyone on the internet. You didn't mean to, but now the whole neighborhood knows you're serving mammoth stew. The smoke itself was no gentle incense either. Anyone who has sat around a campfire knows how it stings when the wind shifts. Now, imagine living in that. Night after night, humans sat in cramped caves or leaned against stone shelters with fires burning. Their eyes watered constantly. They coughed, wheezed, and tried to sleep through the haze. In fact, some anthropologists argue that the first lung problems in human history didn't come from pollution or city smog, but from generations of people living with smoky fires indoors. The modern allergy sufferer who sneezes around scented candles. Their misery has deep roots, but even as smoke caused irritation, it was unavoidable. If you didn't burn enough wood, the fire died, and predators circled closer. Burn too much, and you sat, choking in a cloud. Some nights must have felt like playing a cruel game of balance. Either cough yourself awake all night, or risk waking up as breakfast. And the frustration of it all probably led to more than a few prehistoric arguments. You can almost hear it. You put too much wood on the fire. Well, excuse me for not wanting us eaten by lions. Throg. Now the children can't stop coughing. It was the kind of marital squabble that echoes down the ages. Except instead of arguing about the thermostat, they were arguing about survival and lung health. Smoke wasn't just a respiratory nightmare. It was also a visibility problem. In the confined spaces of caves, smoke clung to ceilings, reducing visibility to a murky haze. Imagine trying to watch for predators sneaking in when you could barely see your own hand. The world blurred, shadows stretched, and everything took on a surreal glow. Firelight through smoke must have looked otherworldly, turning companions into ghostly silhouettes, making the cave feel like a place haunted not only by predators outside, but by phantom shapes inside. And then there was the danger of sparks. A crackle here, a stray ember there. Suddenly your carefully constructed bedding of grass and hides could go up like a bonfire. Humans had traded one danger for another. Less risk of being mauled, more risk of burning alive in your sleep. It was progress. Yes, but progress with disclaimers. Still, for all the misery, smoke taught us something important. It forced experimentation. Over generations, people learned how to arrange fires so that the smoke rose out of cave entrances instead of choking everyone inside. They discovered that certain woods produced less smoke, while others smoldered, like damp laundry. They probably argued endlessly about who was supposed to gather the good wood, and why someone always brought back the smoky kind. Trial and error was brutal, but it forged knowledge that shaped humanity's growing control over the natural world. It also may have shaped our bodies. Some scientists suggest that humanity's ability to detoxify smoke particles gave us a strange evolutionary edge. Over thousands of years, our ancestors became slightly better at tolerating environments filled with smoke than other animals, which meant we could stick with fire long enough to benefit from it, even as our lungs paid the price. Our coughs, our watery eyes, our irritated throats, they were side effects of survival. The comedic side of smoke, though, can't be ignored. Imagine you're a hyena creeping toward a human camp. You see the flicker of flames, and you hear the coughing chorus of humanity inside. It must have sounded ridiculous. An entire group of supposed apex brains, wheezing, hacking, and wiping tears, all while congratulating themselves on their brilliant fire. Predators must have thought, if this is intelligence, we'll stick with our teeth. Thanks. Yet the lesson of smoke is clear. Survival was never perfect. Fire wasn't flawless. It made nights safer, but also harder, and in its flickering glow, our ancestors were learning not just to endure, but to adapt. The coughing, the watery eyes, the glowing signals, all part of the package deal. Fire had given us power, but smoke reminded us that every gift from nature came with strings attached. And so, night after night, humans sat hacking and blinking in the haze, their security system both saving and tormenting them. It was messy, inconvenient, imperfect, but it worked. And in the grand sweep of history, the smoke was a price worth paying. After all, a cough can be endured. Being dragged off by a leopard cannot. If fire was humanity's first invention against the dark, then group sleeping was our oldest instinct. Before houses, before blankets, before alarm clocks, survival meant snuggling, and not the romantic, candlelit kind. This was the sweaty, crowded, slightly uncomfortable reality of people piling together like puppies in a basket, hoping that body heat and sheer numbers would keep them alive until sunrise. Imagine a band of early humans settling in for the night. They've gathered some food, built a smoky little fire, and now the long, dangerous hours of darkness stretch ahead. What do? They huddle. Children in the middle, adults around the edges, everyone pressed close enough to hear each other's breathing. To modern sensibilities, this might sound invasive. No personal space, no privacy, but in prehistory, personal space was a luxury nobody could afford. The night was a predator's hunting ground, and togetherness was the only shield. Sleeping in groups had obvious advantages. For one, warmth. Nights on open plains or in caves were brutally cold. Without central heating, the human body became the heater, and the only way to make that work was to share it. Picture it: 10, 15 people crammed together, layered in furs and skins, toes tucked against someone else's legs, arms wrapped wherever they fit. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept frostbite from claiming fingers and toes. In a world where the cold could kill as quickly as a lion, body heat wasn't just comfort, it was survival currency. Then there was safety in numbers. Alone, a human was easy prey. In a group, even if only a few were awake at any time, predators faced a cluster of eyes, ears, and voices ready to shout or throw rocks. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Group sleeping allowed for staggered awareness. One person stirred, then another, small shifts that meant someone was almost always semi-alert. Humans became light sleepers, not by accident, but by necessity. But the strategy wasn't perfect, and here's where the humor comes in. Sleeping in piles meant dealing with snorers, and snoring in the Stone Age wasn't just annoying, it was hazardous. That thunderous sound might draw attention from a prowling predator. Imagine a group of exhausted humans nudging the loudest sleeper again and again, whispering, "For the love of everything, shut up before the hyenas find us." Ancient families probably developed the earliest elbow in the ribs technique, long before it became common in modern marriages. Then there were the midnight fidgets. One person tosses and turns, and suddenly the whole pile shifts like a wave. Children kick, adults grunt, someone mutters angrily. It was less peaceful slumber and more overnight wrestling match. But as chaotic as it was, nobody dared sleep apart. Distance meant vulnerability. In the calculus of survival, annoyance was tolerable, isolation was not. Anthropologists even believe this style of group sleeping shaped our psychology. The need for closeness fostered cooperation, empathy, and social bonding. You couldn't spend every night pressed against the same people without developing deeper relationships. Every whispered story, every quiet laugh, every shared warmth built trust. In the firelight, with predators prowling outside, humans were learning not just to survive, but to depend on one another. And yet, the arrangement was also strategic. Children, the most vulnerable, were kept in the center. Adults formed the perimeter, essentially becoming the walls of the human house. If a predator managed to break through, it would face the strongest defenders first. In this way, sleeping wasn't passive. It was an organized defensive posture, the Stone Age version of a fortress, made not of stone, but of people. Of course, the dangers of group sleeping included hygiene. Imagine dozens of bodies pressed together, sharing warmth, but also smells. Prehistoric deodorant was not a thing. It must have been pungent, humid, overwhelming. But no matter how bad it was, the alternative, sleeping alone in the cold, with leopards above and hyenas below, was worse. Better to stink in company than to be elegantly scented but eaten. Over time, this strategy of togetherness became more than survival. It became culture. Around fires, people didn't just sleep, they talked, taught, and dreamed. The group pile was the first classroom, the first family room, the first community center. Songs, myths, and jokes were born in those circles. Humanity grew, not just because individuals survived, but because they survived together, night after night. So if you picture early humans at rest, don't imagine solitary figures. Imagine clusters, bundles of warmth and trust, breathing in sync while outside, the wilderness pressed close. They slept like puppies, not because it was cute, but because it worked. And in that closeness, humanity's greatest strength, cooperation, was forged as surely as any tool of stone or fire. There's something almost comical about imagining the first prehistoric committee meeting. A group of weary, smoke-stained humans slumped around a fire, rubbing their eyes after a long day of scraping roots and fending off predators, finally coming to the grim realization: someone has to stay awake. Someone has to be the night watch. And the atmosphere must have been very much like drawing straws in a bad game of chance. Whoever lost wasn't rewarded with a prize, they got a front row seat to the terrifying symphony of the night. The night watch was born out of necessity. Predators didn't politely wait until daylight. They thrived in darkness. And our ancestors, who had the visual acuity of underpowered flashlights, were hopelessly disadvantaged. If everyone fell asleep at the same time, the camp was as good as a buffet line for prowling hyenas or leopards. So humans, clever in their imperfection, invented the concept of shifts. Someone would sit awake, eyes peeled, ears twitching at every rustle, heart thudding with every gust of wind, and when their time was up, they'd nudge the next unlucky soul to take over. Being the watchman was no glamorous honor. There were no medals, no thanks, not even coffee to keep you awake. Instead, there was the cold bite of night air, the relentless sting of smoke in the eyes, and the overwhelming boredom of staring into a void that occasionally turned out not to be a void at all. It was the first thankless job in history, one step above cleaning mammoth hides, and one step below trying to explain to children why they can't play with sharp rocks. Imagine sitting there, crouched beside the fading fire, trying not to nod off. Your companions snore and mutter in their sleep, blissfully unaware of the burden on your shoulders. Meanwhile, you strain your eyes against shadows that seem to move on their own. Was that branch shifting in the breeze? Or was it something with fangs, creeping closer? Every sound becomes suspicious. The crack of a twig feels like a drumbeat. The whoop of a hyena in the distance feels like an alarm bell. And worst of all, there's no way to know whether tonight will be uneventful or whether you'll be the one yelling everyone awake with a predator already in the camp. The boredom of watch duty must have been unbearable at times. Hours of nothing but flickering firelight and the distant hum of insects. You can almost picture some poor ancestor fighting sleep, muttering nonsense to themselves to stay awake. Perhaps the first songs, the first whispered stories, the first attempts at humor were born from guards trying not to nod off. So, a bison walks into a swamp. It wasn't exactly stand-up comedy, but anything was better than silence that made you hear your own heartbeat. And of course, not every watchman succeeded. Fatigue is powerful. Without caffeine, without alarms, without anything but sheer willpower, it was inevitable that some guards drifted off. And those nights became infamous. The sudden chaos, the shouts, the scramble as predators lunged. The unlucky guard jolting awake just in time to realize the nightmare outside had become a nightmare inside. Those failures must have been burned into memory, told again and again as cautionary tales. Stay awake, or remember what happened to Korg. Korg didn't make it, and everyone else coughed smoke for days while patching wounds and nervously reassigning shifts. Over time, the system became more refined. Groups rotated, making sure no single person bore the burden all night. Parents likely took shorter shifts, swapping with older children who could manage. The rhythm of the night became a rhythm of vigilance. 2 hours here, 2 hours there, each watch overlapping enough that someone was always alert. In those rotations, you can see the roots of human organization, the beginnings of scheduling, the earliest attempts at structure that would eventually lead to armies, governments, and corporate meetings where people still fight to stay awake. There's a grim humor in thinking about the first watch rotations. No clocks, no alarms, just rough guesses at time. Someone poking the next person awake with a stick, muttering, "Your turn." Of course, the next person might groan and say, 5 more minutes. Some things never change. And yet, despite the grumbling, it worked. Humans learned to share the burden of night, to distribute the fear, and in doing so, they kept each other alive. The night watch also shaped how humans understood trust. Leaving your life in the hands of someone else while you slept required immense confidence. You had to believe that your companion would stay awake, that they would notice danger, that they would rouse you in time. Failures destroyed trust. Success built bonds. It's not hard to imagine that watch duty became a test of character. If you could stay awake and guard your group, you proved yourself reliable. If you failed, well, maybe you weren't invited to sit near the fire the next night. And out of this nightly ritual grew something extraordinary: cooperation. Predators were stronger, faster, better equipped for the dark. But by taking turns, by watching over each other, humans carved out a fragile foothold in a world designed to devour them. Every shift survived was a victory, not just of one person, but of the group. The night watch, as miserable as it was, helped define humanity itself, not as solitary hunters, but as communal survivors who found strength in responsibility shared. So the next time you struggle to stay awake, during a dull late-night meeting, or a movie that drags on, remember, falling asleep once meant death. And the first people to fight sleep were the unlucky guards who stared into the dark, listened to the silence, and prayed that tonight nothing came creeping out of it. Modern humans take sleep for granted. We curl up under blankets, close our eyes, and expect 8 uninterrupted hours, maybe with a bathroom break in the middle. But for most of our species' history, sleep was not a luxurious, peaceful state. It was shallow, fractured, uneasy. We evolved to dream lightly, because in a world full of predators, deep sleep was as dangerous as leaving your front door open with a sign that said, "Come right in." Aye, come right in. Light, anxious sleep may have been humanity's default mode for thousands of years. Think about it. Predators didn't work on our schedule. They hunted when it was convenient for them, and often that meant the middle of the night. A human lost in the depths of REM sleep wouldn't hear the crunch of paws in the grass or the faint snarl of a leopard above. Light sleepers, though, were more likely to stir, more likely to wake, more likely to survive. And over generations, that survival advantage meant light sleeping became baked into our biology. Even today, echoes of it remain. Ever notice how easy it is to wake up in an unfamiliar place? Hotel rooms, new houses, even a friend's couch. It's called the first night effect. Half of your brain stays a little more alert, as if waiting for danger. That paranoia isn't irrational. It's a survival relic, a reminder that once upon a time, every new sleeping spot came with unknown risks. Early humans probably never slept for long stretches. Instead, they drifted in cycles, waking often, listening, shifting, then falling back asleep. Some took turns with the watch. Others just stirred naturally. Sleep was less a deep dive into dreamland and more a series of cautious dips into shallow pools, ready to spring out at the first sign of trouble. Dreaming itself might have played a role in this survival dance. Vivid, anxious dreams could have been rehearsal for real danger. Nightmares of being chased, of falling, of teeth in the dark. These weren't random horror films produced by the brain. They were simulations, practice runs for what life was really like. The human brain, restless, even in slumber, used dreams to keep its owner alert to danger. Nightmares may have been unpleasant, but they were also training. If you dreamed often enough of leopards leaping from trees, maybe you'd be quicker to react when one really did. But light sleep came with a cost. Chronic fatigue was probably the norm. Our ancestors didn't wake up refreshed and ready to seize the day. They woke up stiff, tired, eyes gritty with smoke, nerves frayed from a dozen false alarms. One child's cough, one misinterpreted shadow, one cry of alarm in the night could jolt the whole group awake. Imagine the frustration. You've just fallen into precious deep sleep for the first time all night, and suddenly everyone is shouting about an owl they thought was a predator. And yet, better safe than sorry. A false alarm meant annoyance. A missed alarm meant extinction. Over time, humans developed a strange resilience to this restless pattern. We became adaptable sleepers. Some individuals naturally drifted into deeper sleep. Others remained lighter, and together, the mix balanced the group. It was like an unconscious watch system built into biology. In every cluster of humans, there was likely always someone a little more awake than the rest. Not because they wanted to be, but because evolution shaped them that way. And let's not forget the humor in all this. If you've ever been accused of being a restless sleeper, tossing and turning, waking at the drop of a pin, congratulations, you would have been the unsung hero of your prehistoric camp. The person who annoyed everyone else by waking them up constantly may also have been the one who saved them from being dragged away by predators. Light sleepers were probably insufferable roommates, but they were essential survivors. Modern life has tried to undo this anxious legacy. We build walls, doors, locks, and security systems. We flood the night with artificial light. And yet, many of us still wake at 3 a.m., hearts pounding, certain that something's wrong. We're not broken, we're remembering. And our bodies are whispering the old rules. Stay alert, stay alive, sleep too deeply, and you might not wake up. So when you finally drift off tonight, tossing and turning, waking to every creak of the house or hum of the wind, take comfort. You are living proof of an ancient strategy. You are the descendant of those who dreamed lightly, who never surrendered fully to darkness, who kept one eye open even while the other drifted into dreams. Their vigilance is why you're here at all. And though it might make for restless nights now, back then, it was the thin line between life and death. Archaeology sometimes feels like detective work, and sometimes it feels like stumbling into the aftermath of an ancient food fight. where nobody cleaned up. Caves across Europe and Africa still hold the traces of one of the longest-running rivalries in prehistory: humans versus hyenas. And the evidence shows it wasn't just a passive, "we live here, they live there" situation. It was an active, often brutal tug-of-war. The caves were the prize, the firelit shelters that gave humans a sense of safety. And the hyenas? They wanted those caves too. For them, caves were pantries, cool, dry, and perfect for storing bones. Humans were trying to turn them into homes. The result was conflict, and the fossils bear the scars. Picture a cave in Ice Age Europe. The walls are blackened by smoke from countless fires. The ground is littered with gnawed bones, reindeer, bison, sometimes even fragments of human remains. When researchers analyze these bones, they find telltale marks, punctures from hyena teeth, deep grooves where jaws crushed marrow. But layered over those are cut marks from stone tools, slices that show humans had been there too, carving meat, scraping hides. Two species, two sets of tools, teeth and flint intersecting in the same space. The story practically writes itself. Humans drag in a kill, roast it, celebrate around the fire. They leave scraps behind, maybe a half-cleaned carcass. Then, when the fire dies down, or the humans are chased out, the hyenas arrive like cleanup crews, gnawing and crunching, leaving their own signature on the remains. Sometimes it went the other way. Hyenas would drag bones into caves first, storing them for later, only to have humans move in afterward. Imagine the discovery. A family of humans entering a cave, pleased to find it empty of predators, only to realize the floor is carpeted with bones. Not just old bones, fresh ones. The kind that still reek of meat. That smell meant the hyenas weren't gone for good. They'd be back, and soon. So humans cleaned up as best they could, tossed bones outside, lit fires, and declared the cave theirs. And when the hyenas returned, they found their pantry had been stolen. This wasn't just coexistence. This was active competition, a nightly back and forth for territory and resources. The fossil record shows overlapping occupation layers. Human artifacts one season, hyena droppings, and chewed bones the next. Sometimes even within the same strata, tangled together, evidence of battles that played out over and over. If you listen closely in those caves, you can almost hear the echoes of snarls and shouts, the clash of bone-crushing jaws against stone-wielding hands. Hyenas weren't timid scavengers in this story. They were bold. They raided camps, testing the edges of firelight, waiting for moments of weakness. Fossils of human children with bite marks suggest that hyenas didn't always stick to scraps. They sometimes made meals of us. To hyenas, a cave filled with slumbering humans was no different than a cave filled with leftovers. If the opportunity was right, they'd snatch what they could. And yet, humans pushed back. The very fact that we have hearths layered over hyena dens proves that we weren't passive victims. We fought for those spaces, sometimes with success, sometimes not. Archaeologists uncover tools broken in conflict, stones scattered in patterns, suggesting frantic defense. These weren't neat moves in a chess match. They were desperate scrambles for survival. There's humor here too, though dark humor. Imagine a caveman proudly dragging home a hunk of mammoth meat, only to wake up at midnight to find a hyena tugging on the other end of it. The first prehistoric tug of war. One side snarling, the other side grunting, both unwilling to let go. Someone probably invented the first curse word right then. And when the hyenas won, their mocking cackles echoed through the cave. like laughter at humanity's expense. The rivalry also left a mark on our psychology. Hyena raids made humans paranoid about storage. The instinct to hoard food securely, to keep pantries locked and guarded, may go back to those early cave battles. Even today, we build pantries and refrigerators as if daring hyenas to try again. The obsession with protecting leftovers might not just be a cultural quirk, it's the echo of hyenas, dragging away mammoth steaks, while our ancestors screamed into the night. And the caves themselves tell the story of uneasy cohabitation. In some, human tools and ornaments are found side by side with piles of gnawed bones, as if both species had made themselves at home in shifts. Caves became contested zones, shared not by choice, but by constant back-and-forth conquest. By morning, a fire-blackened wall told the story of human victory. By nightfall, the bone piles grew again, marking hyena triumph. The tug-of-war lasted millennia, and no side gave up easily. But in the end, we won. Hyenas are still with us, of course, but their dominance shrank as humans perfected weapons, organization, and fire management. The tug-of-war eventually ended not with a single decisive battle, but with slow attrition, as humans claimed caves permanently. And yet, every time a hyena's laugh drifts across the African night, there's a sense of déjà vu. It's the old enemy, still mocking, still reminding us that for a very long time, the caves we called home weren't truly ours. If there's one sound that unites humanity across all of history, it's snoring. Today, it ruins marriages, rattles bedrooms, and inspires the purchase of expensive nasal strips. But in prehistory, snoring wasn't just annoying, it was dangerous, deadly, even. Imagine a world where every noise at night could attract predators. The crack of a twig could make hearts race. The cough of a child could bring hyenas prowling. And then there's that one person, the group's designated chainsaw, rumbling away so loudly they may as well have hung a sign outside the cave. Dinner's ready. Follow the sound. The absurdity writes itself. A group of early humans huddled together in anxious silence, listening to distant roars, when suddenly, from the back of the pile, erupts a snort so loud it startles everyone awake. The fire flickers. Someone groans. Someone else hisses. Shut him up before something hears. The poor snorer rolls over, blissfully unaware that they're endangering everyone else. The first prehistoric elbow in the ribs was probably delivered not out of annoyance, but out of sheer survival instinct. But it wasn't just volume, it was unpredictability. Snoring comes in bursts. A low rumble, then a pause, then an explosive snort. To a predator, those sounds might have been as obvious as a tracking beacon. Leopards prowling above camp, hyenas circling outside, even owls swooping silently. Any of them could follow the rhythm of a snorer's breathing, straight to the group. And once a predator found the group, chaos followed. People scrambling, children crying, fire embers scattering, and all because Uncle Grog had a deviated septum. The fossil record doesn't exactly preserve the evidence of snoring, of course. No archaeologist has dug up a skull and declared, this one definitely kept everyone awake. But the consequences are written between the lines of survival. Groups had to adapt to the problem of noise, and that meant managing their snorers. Perhaps the loudest were placed in the middle of the pile, where their snores were muffled by the bodies around them. Or perhaps they were pushed toward the edges, sacrificial decoys, so to speak. If the leopard was going to pounce, at least let it grab the noisy one first. It's grim, but evolution often is. Humor aside, the threat was real. Sleep was already light and fractured, punctuated by constant waking. Add in the roar of a snorer, and the fragile illusion of safety collapsed. Imagine trying to rest with predators prowling outside and someone making predator noises inside. It was like living in a horror movie with a laugh track. No wonder humans developed the habit of nudging, shaking, and shushing their companions in the night. Survival required silence, and silence required dealing with those who disturbed it. Of course, snoring isn't anyone's fault. It's a byproduct of anatomy, of throats and nasal passages vibrating as air rushes through. But evolution may have quietly favored quieter sleepers. The loudest snorers, after all, risked drawing death to their groups. Perhaps over time, genetic quirks that reduced noise were subtly selected for. The fact that snoring still plagues us today suggests it wasn't eliminated, but it may have been diminished. In other words, if you snore today, be grateful you weren't born 40,000 years ago. You might not have survived long enough to pass on your genes, and yet, the comedy of it lingers. Picture a solemn, prehistoric elder telling the children around the fire, remember, silence is survival. Except for your grandfather, who sounds like a bear choking on a log. The group laughs, but nervously, because as much as they joked, they knew it was no laughing matter. Hyenas didn't care whether the sound was funny or not. To them, it was a signal. Free meat ahead. Snoring also played into the larger theme of group living. When people slept in piles, every flaw became magnified. Body odor, twitching legs, coughs, and yes, snoring. These annoyances forced tolerance. You couldn't exile a companion just for making noise, because every person was valuable to the group. But you could scold them, nudge them, or invent strategies to minimize the risk. That balance between annoyance and survival was a cornerstone of early human cooperation. So tonight, when you lie in bed next to a snorer, maybe roll your eyes, maybe shove them gently, but also remember you're participating in one of humanity's oldest traditions. For tens of thousands of years, people have been grumbling in the night about the noise of their companions. And while today, the stakes are just lost sleep and morning grogginess, long ago the stakes were much higher. Silence could mean survival. Noise could mean death. It's a reminder that even our most mundane frustrations carry echoes of prehistory. Snoring isn't just a domestic nuisance. It's a relic of nights when predators prowled outside the firelight, when every sound mattered, when one loud sleeper could put the whole group at risk. And yet, somehow, humanity endured, noisy throats and all. Perhaps it's proof that we're not just survivors, but forgiving ones, too. After all, even the loudest snorers were still part of the pile, still part of the family, still part of the fragile human chain that made it through the long, perilous nights. To the tired eyes of an early human stumbling through the twilight, caves must have seemed like miracles carved into stone. Imagine wandering across a windswept plain as the sun dips low, the cold beginning to settle in, predators already testing the air with hungry noses. And suddenly, there it is, a hollow in the rock, a roof, a place where wind won't claw at your skin, where rain can't soak you, where walls might protect you from teeth in the dark. For a creature with no fur thick enough to keep out the chill, and no claws sharp enough to fend off an ambush, a cave was the prehistoric equivalent of checking into a 5-star hotel. Or at least, that's what they thought, until reality came crashing in. Because caves weren't safe havens, they were invitations to trouble. To us, a cave might sound cozy, like the perfect set piece for survival. To lions, leopards, wolves, and especially bears, caves weren't hotels. They were prime real estate. The animal kingdom had already established a long-term lease. Humans were late arrivals trying to crash the party. And the worst part? There was no front desk to tell you whether a cave was available. You didn't know if it was empty until you stepped inside, and sometimes discovered far too late that something large, furry, and extremely territorial was already the resident. Imagine the first person bold enough to peer into a shadowy cave with nothing but a burning stick for light. Their heart pounding, smoke curling around their face, every muscle tight with tension. Maybe they saw nothing. Maybe it was empty. Or maybe they caught the gleam of eyes reflecting back, a low growl building from the dark, followed by the thunder of something charging. That lesson must have been learned quickly. Caves seemed safe, but many were already claimed. Even when a cave was truly empty, it carried its own hazards. They were cold, damp, and full of drafts. Water seeped down the walls, pooling on the floor. The air smelled of bat guano, a stench strong enough to make eyes water. And yet, humans used them because the illusion of security was better than standing exposed in the open. At least in a cave, you had walls at your back, stone at your sides, and a sense false, though it might be that the darkness couldn't creep in as easily. But predators knew caves as well as we did. Hyenas dragged bones inside to gnaw at their leisure. Leopards cached their kills there, stashing half-eaten antelopes on ledges. Bears hibernated in them, curling up in enormous piles of muscle and fur that could crush a human with one casual roll. Archaeologists today find layers of evidence, hyena droppings, mixed with human hearth, ash, leopard scratches, etched into stone beside fire-blackened walls. The record tells the same story again and again. Humans and predators fought over these spaces, trading possession like landlords and squatters, locked in endless cycles of eviction. Sometimes, humans tried to defend their caves with fire. A blazing hearth near the entrance threw out light and heat, warning predators to stay back. But fire also made the cave glow like a lantern in the night, announcing to every prowling creature for miles that there was something alive inside. And if predators were bold enough, they didn't just sniff from outside, they came in. Imagine the horror of huddling deep in the shadows, fire flickering low, when a bear's head suddenly filled the entrance. No door, no lock, no escape, except to scramble deeper into the dark and hope it lost interest. The irony of caves is that their strength was also their weakness. The narrow entrances gave humans confidence, only one point of attack to defend. But if that single entrance was breached, everyone inside was trapped. There was no back door, no emergency exit. Once a predator pushed through, chaos erupted in close quarters. Screams echoed against stone, the fire sputtered, weapons clanged uselessly against walls, and the darkness itself seemed to smother the group. What had seemed like a fortress became a tomb. And yet, humans kept returning to caves. Why? Because compared to sleeping under open skies, they were still better odds. In a cave, at least, you weren't exposed to wind and rain. At least you could block part of the entrance with brush or rocks. At least, if you were lucky, the space belonged to you for a night or two. Over generations, humans learned which caves were safe, which weren't, and which were worth fighting for. The evidence of their tenacity still remains. Charred hearths layered deep into cave floors, paintings daubed on walls, handprints pressed into stone. Caves weren't just shelters. They became canvases, classrooms, even sacred places. But those meanings came only after centuries of fear, after countless nights where every sound in the dark made hearts pound. The comedy of it all isn't lost either. Imagine a group finally settling into a cave, proud of themselves for finding such a fine shelter. They stack their belongings, settle by the fire, maybe even relax enough to tell a story. Then, just as they drift towards sleep, they hear a low growl from the shadows at the back of the chamber. Slowly, dozens of glowing eyes open wolves, hyenas, maybe bats disturbed into frantic flight. Everyone bolts for the exit, tripping over each other, cursing loudly. The cave is abandoned in chaos, and the predators retake it without missing a beat. Humanity's first checkout time was often earlier than expected. So caves were never the safe havens we imagine. They were contested, risky, unpredictable. But they taught us lessons about vigilance, about resourcefulness, about the illusion of safety. They pushed us to innovate, to build fires, to make tools, to stick together. And though they often betrayed us, caves shaped our survival. We thought we were finding homes in stone. In truth, we were learning that survival was never about the walls themselves. It was about the people inside them. Long before caves became contested battlegrounds, there was another strategy humans tried: climbing trees. It sounds obvious, almost instinctive. After all, our ancestors were apes. Trees were the original refuge, the place where generations had slept long before they became recognizably human. But by the time early humans had grown taller, heavier, and less nimble, climbing back into branches wasn't the graceful ballet it had been for their primate cousins. It was awkward, necessary, but awkward. Imagine a band of weary hunter-gatherers, eyeing the approaching darkness. The predators are stirring, their calls echoing across the plains. The grass whispers, with unseen movement. There's no cave nearby, no rocky outcrop to shelter in, no fire yet mastered. What's left? The trees, tall, sprawling, ancient things, their branches spread wide. And so, reluctantly, humans clambered up, gripping bark with hands built for tools, more than climbing, scrambling with feet that weren't quite made for branches. It wasn't elegant. It was survival. Sleeping in trees had clear advantages. From above, you were out of reach of many predators. Hyenas couldn't follow. Wolves had no chance. The wind carried your scent away more easily. You could see danger approach, at least when the moonlight was kind. But the disadvantages were just as glaring. For one, humans weren't very good at holding on while unconscious. Monkeys and apes have specialized tendons that lock their grip as they sleep, letting them hang without fear of falling. Humans lacked that feature, which meant drifting into deep sleep risked a rude awakening splat on the ground below, where a very surprised predator might be waiting. It's easy to picture the comedy in this. A group of early humans all perched nervously in branches, muttering about the discomfort, trying to stay still. Hours pass. One by one, they drift into shallow dozes. And then, crack. Someone shifts, loses balance, tumbles out of the tree. With a thud, the whole group jolts awake, hearts pounding, scanning the dark for eyes. The unlucky sleeper groans from the ground, half asleep, and before anyone can pull him back up, a shadow moves at the edge of camp. Experiment over. The lesson learned was painfully simple. Humans were not built for sleep anymore. Still, they tried. Evidence suggests that even as humans became more ground-dwelling, tree sleeping lingered as a fallback, especially for vulnerable groups like children. Smaller bodies were easier to wedge into safe perches, easier to balance in crooks where branches split. Parents likely hoisted their young into branches as a last defense, standing guard below to ward off predators. And while children clung like little bundles of safety, adults probably endured long, uncomfortable nights below, gazing upward and wondering if they'd made the right call. Tree sleeping also carried its own dangers from above. Leopards, already skilled climbers, dominated that domain. To them, a human in a tree was not safe. It was convenient. Prey already halfway delivered to their preferred dining spot. More than one human must have awakened to the horrifying sight of a leopard prowling along the same branch, eyes gleaming, tail twitching. In those moments, a tree transformed from sanctuary into trap, nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, only a desperate scramble down into the waiting jaws of other predators. And yet, trees still appealed, because they offered what humans craved most: distance. To be above, even briefly, was to imagine being beyond the reach of the night. The higher branches whispered promises of safety. Even if those promises were often broken, they gave enough hope for another attempt the next night. The sheer persistence of tree sleeping suggests that humans were willing to endure the falls, the scrapes, the awkwardness, all for the illusion of being safe. The image is almost comical when you think about it today. Picture modern humans, tall and awkward, trying to curl themselves across a branch for a night's rest. Limbs dangling, backs twisted, mosquitoes buzzing relentlessly. And yet, those uncomfortable nights in trees were stepping stones in survival. They taught humans about risk, about vigilance, about the need for better solutions. Each fall, each brush with predators, each restless night added pressure to innovate. Caves, fires, huts, all of them were born from the failures of trying to sleep in branches that didn't want us anymore. Still, something of that tree-sleeping instinct lingers in us. Many people today prefer hammocks, swaying gently above the ground. Children love climbing trees, perching high as if savoring some ancient instinct. And even in our language, we still talk about seeking a higher ground, as if the safest place is always just a little above where danger prowls. So while tree sleeping may have been awkward, it was also a chapter in the story of how humans clawed their way through prehistory. For a time, we clung to branches like exiles, caught between the past we were leaving and the future we had yet to invent. And though the strategy was flawed, it worked well enough, long enough, for us to find better answers. The trees held us while we dreamed lightly, while we survived another night, until we finally climbed down for good. Necessity may be the mother of invention, but fear is the frantic aunt who barges into the room and yells, "Do something, or we're all going to die." For early humans, invention wasn't driven by idle curiosity or the noble pursuit of progress. It was driven by the simple, bone-chilling fact that every rustle in the dark could be something with claws. Fear pushed our ancestors to get creative, and in doing so, they started building the first tools of what we might call prehistoric home security. Imagine life before weapons. A group of humans, armed only with their fists and maybe a sharp rock, staring down a lion. The lion yawns, flicks its tail, and doesn't even bother to take them seriously. That imbalance of power couldn't last. So, out of fear, humans learned to modify nature. A stick wasn't just a stick anymore. Sharpen one end, harden it in the fire, and suddenly you had something to keep teeth at bay. It wasn't perfect. You weren't about to joust a bear, but it made predators hesitate. The first spears weren't designed for glory in the hunt. They were designed for desperate, sweaty-handed defense, brandished by someone who had absolutely no intention of testing them unless cornered. Over time, though, fear sharpened not just wood, but wits. Spears became better. Stone tips lashed with sinew, balanced for throwing. A predator, circling the camp at night, now faced not just screams and rocks, but sharp projectiles flying through the firelight. Spears turned fear into distance. Instead of waiting for claws to be inches from your face, you could strike from far enough away to maybe, just maybe, live to see morning. And then came traps. If fire and spears were humanity's early alarms and weapons, traps were our locks, our barricades, our way of saying, fine, if predators want to sneak up on us, let's make sneaking expensive. Pitfalls dug along game trails, covered with branches and leaves, didn't just catch animals for food. They also became obstacles for anything prowling near camp. Nets and snares, crude at first, were laid with the same anxious creativity. Anything to even the odds. You can picture it. A group of humans crouched in the dark, whispering, eyes darting, as they check the traps set around their perimeter. Security wasn't abstract, it was visceral. But security systems are only as good as the humans running them. Early versions must have been laughably unreliable. Someone probably dug a pitfall, covered it badly, and fell into it themselves. Someone else tried to build a barricade of branches, only to watch a hyena stroll through like it was opening a bead curtain. Trial and error was brutal. Yet, failure wasn't the end, it was the lesson. Every mistake carved new knowledge, slowly refining strategies, until humans grew skilled at turning fear into innovation. And fear never stopped pushing. Think about the rhythm of daily life. You gather food, you cook it, you huddle close, but you don't relax. You look over your shoulder constantly, because survival is fragile. That vigilance meant ideas never stopped churning. Could the fire be bigger? Could the weapons be sharper? Could the traps be stronger? Fear was the relentless tutor, making sure no one forgot the stakes. It's funny, though, to imagine just how frantic these inventions sometimes were. A prehistoric family trying to sleep, hyenas laughing outside, and one desperate soul suddenly declaring, "We need more sticks. Sharpen them. Now, point them at the entrance." It wasn't a carefully planned project. It was panic given physical form. Yet those panicked nights built the foundations of engineering, strategy, even warfare. Fear was the architect of progress. Inventions born of fear also changed how predators saw us. At first, we were snacks. Later, we were snacks with sharp accessories. By the time humans had spears and organized defenses, predators approached with more caution. That caution gave humans precious breathing room. For the first time in history, the balance began to shift. We weren't just prey. We were prey that fought back, prey that trapped the hunter, prey that sometimes won. Even now, you can trace those roots. Locks on doors, alarms on phones, motion sensor lights. They're all modern versions of sharpened sticks and pitfalls. Fear still drives us to secure our homes against whatever prowls in the night. But the original security system wasn't made of steel or silicon. It was fire, spears, and the ingenious, sometimes comical, inventions of terrified humans who refused to be silent victims. For all the terror predators inspired, for all the sleepless nights and desperate scrambles, they were also the greatest teachers humans ever had. It might sound strange to give credit to the very beasts that stalked us, but without them, our intelligence and cooperation might never have reached the levels that define us today. Predators were brutal professors, and their lessons were carved into the very fabric of who we are. Consider the simplest lesson: awareness. Hyenas, leopards, lions, bears, they were always watching, always waiting. Humans learned to pay attention because distraction meant death. The ability to notice subtle changes in the environment, the snap of a twig, the shift of wind carrying scent, wasn't optional. It was the final exam you had to pass every single night. That constant demand sharpened senses and minds. We didn't evolve big brains just to solve puzzles for fun. We evolved them because predators demanded vigilance, and predators taught us the value of cooperation. Alone, a human was hopeless. A single leopard could dispatch one person without breaking stride. But together, a group could shout, wave torches, hurl stones, brandish spears. Predators forced us into unity. They pushed us to coordinate, to communicate, to trust one another with our lives. That nightly dependence became the seed of society. Cooperation didn't grow out of kindness. It grew out of terror. And yet, over time, it blossomed into culture, language, and shared identity. Predators also shaped strategy. They didn't attack predictably. Sometimes they circled in silence. Sometimes they lunged straight in. Humans learned to think ahead, to anticipate, to plan defenses, not just for what was seen, but for what might be hiding. This predictive thinking, the ability to imagine threats before they happened, was the root of imagination itself. Fear didn't just make us cautious. It made us storytellers, spinning warnings into myths, legends, and teachings to pass knowledge down. A child who listened to a tale about the leopard in the tree wasn't just entertained. They were learning, absorbing survival lessons, disguised as stories. But perhaps the greatest lesson predators gave us was humility. For millions of years, we were not the apex. We were not kings of the savannah. We were nervous bipeds, clutching sticks, running, scrambling, hiding, and praying. That vulnerability shaped empathy. When survival depends on everyone making it through the night, arrogance doesn't last. Compassion, sharing, watching out for the weak, these weren't luxuries. They were necessities hammered into us by predators who punished every lapse in solidarity. And yet, there's humor in this relationship, too. Imagine predators unintentionally running a school. Hyenas teaching advanced food storage awareness. Leopards running a seminar on why you should always look up. Bears lecturing on never assume a cave is empty. Attendance wasn't optional, and those who skipped class usually didn't return. Every night was a practical exam, graded harshly. Humans stumbled, panicked, failed, and learned. And the longer they survived, the smarter they became. The predators never meant to make us intelligent, of course. They were simply hungry, but hunger pressed us into ingenuity. It sharpened our reflexes, honed our social bonds, and carved the edges of our imagination. Without predators, humans might have stayed simple gatherers, content to nibble roots and berries under the sundae, but with predators pressing relentlessly, we became strategists, inventors, storytellers, and allies. Even now, echoes of those lessons shape us. The fear of the dark, the restless sleep, the instinct to huddle together in groups, the tendency to jump at sudden noises. They're not flaws. They're the inheritance of ancient classrooms, where teachers with claws kept us honest. Predators taught us to survive, but more than that, they taught us to become human. Fear, for all its cruelty, has always had a funny side. Not funny in the moment. Of course, nobody chuckles while running for their life from something with teeth the size of daggers. But funny in hindsight, once the adrenaline drains and everyone realizes the monster they screamed about was, in fact, just an owl. Prehistoric life was full of these awkward missteps, moments when the imagination sprinted faster than reality, and groups of weary humans ended up embarrassing themselves under the indifferent stars. Picture a small band of humans sitting around a smoky fire at night. The flames crackle, casting long shadows across the cave walls. Outside, the night hums with the usual chorus. Insects buzzing, leaves rustling, distant howls. Everyone is tense, but pretending not to be. Then, suddenly, from the darkness above, comes a deep, resonant "hoo," a sound no one had catalogued yet. Every head whips upward, eyes wide, muscles frozen. The fire pops. Someone gasps, and then pandemonium. Spears are grabbed. Children are bundled. People shout warnings. One poor soul, convinced they're under attack from some gargantuan predator, bolts headfirst into a tree. Meanwhile, perched calmly on a branch, is an owl, staring down with enormous yellow eyes that might as well be glowing lanterns. And once the danger has passed, once no claws or fangs materialize, there must have been a collective groan, a few nervous laughs, someone muttering, "Really? We panicked over that?" But the relief was always tempered with unease. Because the truth was, it could have been something else. The line between overreacting and underreacting was razor thin, and survival often depended on assuming the worst. Better to mistake an owl for a monster than to mistake a monster for an owl. These comic blunders repeated endlessly. The wind catching loose branches might sound like footsteps. A hare darting through underbrush might trigger full-scale alarm. A pair of glowing eyes reflecting in the distance might turn out to be nothing more than a curious deer. But in the moment, those eyes could send half the camp into a sprint. Humans lived in a constant state of anxious readiness, and sometimes that readiness tipped into slapstick. Imagine the stories that spread afterward. The bravest hunter of the group, the one who once fought off a hyena with nothing but a rock, reduced to trembling because a pine cone dropped unexpectedly from above. The elder who scolded everyone about keeping composure at night, only to shriek when a bat brushed against his ear. Fear humbled everyone, and, in its humbling, it united them. Even the strongest had their moments of ridiculous terror. These false alarms weren't just funny, they served a function. They sharpened reflexes. Every misidentified shadow kept the group's survival instincts tuned. Overreacting taught lessons just as much as genuine threats. If one person screamed about a rustle and the whole camp leapt awake, nobody went back to sleep quickly, but everyone learned to listen more carefully next time. The human imagination, prone to exaggeration, became a survival tool. That same imagination later blossomed into art, myth, and religion. But in the beginning, it was mostly the cause of a lot of unnecessary running and panicked yelling. And yet, fear's comic side gave people a chance to laugh. Laughter itself may have been an antidote to terror, a way of releasing tension after a false alarm. When the owl was revealed, when the bush turned out to be empty, when the glowing eyes were only fireflies, humans probably collapsed into nervous giggles. That laughter wasn't frivolous, it was bonding. It reminded everyone that even in the face of death, they could find moments of absurdity. And in a way, that ability to laugh at fear may have been one of humanity's secret weapons. Think of the difference between a group that falls into despair after every scare and a group that learns to chuckle shake their heads, and move on. The second group wastes less energy, carries less psychological baggage, and stays closer together. Humor in the face of danger was practice for resilience, and resilience was everything. Even today, when we jump at a horror movie and then laugh at ourselves, we're echoing the same survival pattern. Panic first, laugh second, survive both. Fear made our ancestors cautious, yes, but it also made them storytellers. Every owl mistaken for a monster became a tale told around the fire the next night. Remember when you thought the tree was a bear? Remember when you ran so fast you tripped over your own child? The embarrassment hardened into legend, and legend hardened into cautionary tales. Over time, those tales helped distinguish between true threats and harmless ones. But the laughs lingered, because without them, life in the dark would have been nothing but misery. So, the funny side of fear wasn't just comic relief. It was survival through levity. Those awkward missteps, those overblown panics, those frantic retreats from owls and shadows were part of the education of humanity. They taught us humility, they bonded us through shared embarrassment, and they gave us stories worth retelling. If our ancestors could laugh at themselves after mistaking a puff of wind for a monster, maybe we can laugh too when we wake up in the night, convinced the creak in the hallway was something supernatural, only to discover it was the cat knocking over a glass. The instinct is ancient. The comedy is timeless. For most of prehistory, humans were prey, nervous, cautious, never quite in control, always one mistake away from disaster. But slowly, imperceptibly, something changed. It didn't happen overnight, or even in a single millennium. It was a gradual, grinding shift. As humans clawed their way from the bottom of the food chain to the top, the story of that transformation is one of ingenuity, cooperation, and stubborn persistence. It's the story of how fragile bipeds with no claws, dull teeth, and poor night vision became the most formidable predators the world has ever known. At first, the shift was barely noticeable. A spear hurled successfully at a hyena pack that had drawn too close. A fire kept blazing long enough to discourage a prowling leopard. A trap that actually worked. Each small victory chipped away at the predator's dominance. Humans weren't fearless yet, but they were no longer helpless either. Fear was still present, but now it was paired with a growing sense of possibility. The transformation accelerated with cooperation. One human alone with a spear could barely fend off a predator. 10 humans working in concert, shouting, brandishing weapons, moving in sync, could drive predators back. That cooperation spilled over into hunts. Instead of waiting to scavenge from others, humans began to take initiative, targeting prey themselves. It was risky, but the rewards were enormous. Not scraps, but full carcasses. Not dependence, but choice. And predators that had once seen humans as rivals now began to see them as threats. The leap wasn't just physical, it was mental. Humans learned patience, tracking animals over vast distances, wearing them down with persistence hunting. They learned to anticipate behavior, to use the wind and terrain to their advantage. The hunted were becoming hunters, not because they suddenly sprouted fangs, but because their brains turned strategy into a weapon sharper than any claw. Still, the shift was never clean. Predators didn't suddenly bow and retreat. Hyenas kept testing, lions kept roaring, bears kept charging. Many nights still ended in terror and blood. But gradually, the balance tilted. The predators that once owned the night began to hesitate when approaching human camps. firelight, and spears signaled risk. And risk, to even the hungriest beast, wasn't always worth it. There's humor in imagining the first predator to realize humans were no longer easy pickings. Perhaps a lion lunged toward a group by the fire, expecting screams and flight, only to be met with a rain of sharp projectiles and furious shouting. Singed fur, bruised pride, a hasty retreat, and perhaps a vow never to underestimate these strange, noisy creatures again. Predators had always been teachers, but now the students were surpassing them. The psychological shift in humans was just as important. Fear was no longer paralyzing, it was motivating. Instead of shrinking back, humans began to see opportunity in the hunt. The same predators that once terrorized them became competitors and, eventually, prey themselves. Archaeological evidence shows humans scavenging lion carcasses, wearing leopard skins, and even incorporating predator bones into rituals. Slowly, predators became symbols, not overlords. But this rise carried its own dangers. Power meant responsibility, and humans weren't always gentle rulers of their new domain. Once the balance tipped decisively, predators who had once kept humans sharp began to dwindle. Lions, leopards, hyenas, they survived, but in smaller ranges, fewer numbers. Bears that once towered over camps vanished into extinction. The hunted had become the hunters, and the hunters were too good at their jobs. Yet, it's important to remember how slow this process was. For tens of thousands of years, humans lived in the in-between, not entirely prey, not entirely predator, but precariously balanced between both. Nights still carried terror, but days began to carry triumph. Each hunt, each invention, each act of cooperation nudged the scales. And eventually, the species that had once huddled together, like trembling animals, by smoky fires, looked out across the plains and realized the world no longer belonged to claws and fangs. It belonged to them. There's something strangely comforting in this long arc of change. The shift reminds us that power doesn't appear all at once. It builds slowly, one fearful night, one awkward invention, one small victory at a time. Our ancestors didn't leap to dominance. They crawled, stumbled, and clawed their way upward, dragging with them the lessons predators had hammered into their bones. And so, humans crossed a threshold, from prey to predators, from fragile to formidable, from cowering to conquering. The night still echoed with roars and laughter, but now the roars were answered, and sometimes silenced. Humanity had finally turned the tables, not because it lost fear, but because it learned how to wield fear as fuel. It's one of the oddest quirks of modern life. We live in a world of light. Cities glow so brightly, you can see them from space. Even the countryside, which feels quiet and remote, usually has a porch light, a distant highway, or the faint orange haze of a town on the horizon. And yet, despite all that illumination, darkness still unnerves us. We wake in the night, glance toward the corner of the room, and wonder what might be hiding there. We flick on lights when we hear a noise. We tell children, there's nothing under the bed, while secretly checking for ourselves. Why? Why do shadows still hold so much sway over us, when lions and leopards no longer prowl outside our doors? The answer is simple. Because for most of human history, the dark was where danger lived. Millions of years of being prey wired our brains to treat darkness as a threat, and that wiring hasn't gone away just because we invented the light bulb. In fact, Every time the lights go out unexpectedly, you can feel it. The sudden thud of your heartbeat, the way your ears strain for sound, that little voice that whispers, "What if something's there?" It's not rational, it's ancestral. It's the echo of nights where something usually was there, and usually it wanted to eat you. Our eyes never adapted to true night vision. We see well in daylight, better than most animals. But in darkness, we are clumsy. Shapes blur, details vanish, and every shadow stretches into something menacing. Predators took advantage of that for eons. The leopard in the tree, the hyena creeping at the edge of the firelight, the bear looming in the cave entrance, all of them taught us that night was not our time. Our fear of the dark isn't superstition. It's survival, refined by countless generations of those who jumped at shadows and lived, instead of those who ignored them and didn't. Even today, we feel it in the strangest places. A basement, when the light flicks off and the silence presses in. A long walk down an empty road under a moonless sky. The hotel room, where every unfamiliar creak feels like a threat. The fear is irrational, but only because our lives are safe now. Thousands of years ago, the creak wasn't the house settling. It was the soft pad of paws. The fear lingers, a vestige of wisdom that no longer applies, but refuses to fade. Children remind us most clearly of this legacy. They fear the dark instinctively, long before they understand what danger means. They beg for nightlights, leave closets open, check under beds. Adults tell them it's silly, but really, it isn't. It's a memory passed down in DNA, a reminder that once upon a time, no human child was truly safe in the night. Darkness carried predators, and only the careful ones, the anxious ones, the fearful ones, survived to pass their genes on. And let's admit it, sometimes fear of the dark has a funny edge. How many times have you hurried down a hallway after turning off the light, pretending you're not rushing, but moving just a little faster than usual? How often have you sat upright in bed after hearing a noise, armed with nothing but a pillow, ready to defend yourself against what, exactly? A raccoon in the trash? The air conditioner? Our brains are primed for drama, even in the safest of bedrooms. It's ridiculous, and it's also ancient truth. Of course, culture layered on top of biology, myths, monsters, ghost stories. These are cultural fingerprints on the same primal canvas. Where our ancestors feared lions, we fear boogeymen. Where they listened for growls, we imagine footsteps on the stairs. Darkness is a blank page, and the human mind loves to scribble threats across it. The creatures of folklore are just stand-ins for the predators that once prowled, reimagined for a world where the claws and teeth have mostly retreated. But the persistence of fear also shows how effective it was. Those who weren't cautious about the dark didn't live long enough to influence the future. And so, we inherited vigilance. The human race might laugh at itself for being afraid of empty rooms and flickering shadows, but beneath that laughter lies a truth. Fear kept us alive. The shadows still whisper because our ancestors couldn't afford to ignore them. Yet, there's something oddly beautiful about this inheritance. Fear of the dark is a bridge between past and present. It connects us to the lives of those who came before, to nights when firelight was the only comfort, when laughter from hyenas meant sleepless hours, when every gust of wind in the grass was a potential ambush. Every time we flip on a light switch in the middle of the night, we are reenacting the same ritual, banishing shadows, with a fragile glow. So, if you feel silly for being unsettled by the dark, don't. You're not irrational. You're remembering. The shadows linger because they were always dangerous once. The fact that you can now crawl back into bed, pull the covers up, and sleep soundly, despite them, is proof of how far we've come. The darkness hasn't changed, but we have. And now, after the long march through hyena raids, saber-toothed ambushes, caves that weren't so safe, trees that weren't so steady, and fires that smoked us like sausages, we come to the part our ancestors longed for most, a safe good night. Tonight, unlike them, you don't need to huddle in a pile with 15 other people, sweating and grumbling about elbows in your ribs. You don't need to assign someone to keep watch or argue about who snores loudest. You don't need to worry about glowing eyes circling in the dark. You can close your eyes in the quiet confidence that the worst thing prowling around might be your neighbor's cat, and it's probably more interested in kibble than in you. It's worth pausing on that. For millions of years, sleep was not peaceful. It was a gamble. Humans drifted into shallow dreams, with one ear open, one eye twitching, always ready to wake at the sound of danger. But now, after fire and spears and walls and locks, after all the struggles and inventions born of fear, we have won the right to sleep deeply, to let go of vigilance, to surrender to dreams without anxiety. That luxury was bought for us by countless generations who didn't have it. Their battles, their inventions, their laughter at false alarms, their whispered stories by smoky fires, all of it carried us here, to soft beds, quiet rooms, and safe nights. And perhaps it's comforting to remember, you are never really alone in the dark. You carry with you the resilience of every ancestor who survived their own long nights. Their vigilance flows in your blood. Their laughter echoes in your imagination. Their fear lingers in your instincts. But so does their triumph. You are, in a very literal way, the descendant of those who made it through, night after night, until dawn came. The safe good night you experience now is their gift to you. So, as you settle under your blanket, as you feel the weight of sleep pulling at you, know that it's safe to let go. There are no hyenas lurking at the edge of your fire, no leopards poised above your bed, no bears pushing into your cave. The shadows in your room are just shadows, harmless, empty, fading as your eyes close. The night, once a time of terror, is now a time of rest. And if you feel a little silly, remembering all those awkward ancestors mistaking owls for monsters, or running headlong from harmless noises, let yourself smile. Humor was part of survival too. Laughter softened fear, and it still does. You can let the funny side of those old terrors rock you gently towards sleep, secure in the knowledge that nothing is waiting out there. You're safe, truly safe. And that brings us to the end of tonight's story. I hope your eyes are heavy, your body is calm, and you're ready for deep, peaceful sleep. Rest well, dream gently, and let the shadows outside fade into nothing. If you're somehow still awake, you can keep the journey going. Just click on one of the 2 videos glowing softly on your screen right now. And if you'd like more nights like this, filled with strange history and soothing stories, make sure to subscribe. Sleep well, and I'll see you in the next dream. Good night. Sleep deeply. You've inherited the hard-earned rest of countless generations, and tonight, it is yours.